The evening rush at the Sterling Room was in full swing when Elena pushed through the kitchen doors with a tray of appetizers balanced on her shoulder. The restaurant sat on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in downtown Manhattan, and through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights sparkled like a carpet of stars below. It was the kind of place where a single bottle of wine could cost more than Elena made in a week. She had been working here for almost 3 years now, ever since everything in her life had fallen apart. The black uniform, the polite smile, the practiced way she could carry 4 plates at once without breaking a sweat. This was her life now, and she had made peace with it. Most days anyway. Elena noticed him the moment he walked in. It was hard not to. Vincent Blackwell moved through the world like he owned it, and in many ways he did. The real estate developer was worth somewhere north of $500 million, according to the business magazines that occasionally sat in the restaurant's waiting area. He came to the Sterling Room twice a month, always with a different group of wealthy friends, always demanding the best table with the best view. Tonight he had 4 people with him. They were all dressed in expensive suits and designer dresses, laughing at something Vincent had said before they even reached their table. Elena watched as the hostess led them to table 12 right in her section. Her stomach tightened. She had served Vincent before, and it never went well. "Good evening," Elena said as she approached their table, her voice warm and professional. She had learned long ago to never let her real feelings show on her face. "Can I start you off with some drinks, or would you like a few minutes to look at the menu?" Vincent didn't look up. He was scrolling through his phone, his thumb moving rapidly across the screen. The light from it cast shadows across his face, making him look almost ghost-like in the dim restaurant lighting. "Water," he said flatly. "Room temperature. Not cold, not warm. Room temperature. And make sure the glasses are spotless. Last time there were water spots." Elena wrote it down, though she didn't need to. Of course. "And for everyone else?" The woman sitting to Vincent's right, a blonde in a silver dress that probably cost more than Elena's car, smiled apologetically. "I'll have a glass of the Chateau Margaux, please." The others ordered their drinks, all of them meeting Elena's eyes, all of them seeming slightly embarrassed by Vincent's rudeness. She had seen this before. People who surrounded themselves with someone like Vincent often felt uncomfortable with his behavior but never said anything. Money had a way of silencing people. When Elena returned with the drinks, Vincent finally looked at her. His eyes swept over her uniform, her name tag, her face, all with the same expression someone might use when examining a piece of furniture they were considering throwing away. "These glasses better be perfect," he said, picking up his water and holding it up to the light. He turned it slowly, inspecting every inch of it. "Ah, there, see that? That tiny spot right there? I asked for spotless." Elena looked at where he was pointing. She couldn't see anything. The glass had come straight from the dishwasher, and she had checked it herself before pouring the water. "I apologize," she said, her voice steady. "Let me get you a fresh glass right away." "You know what your problem is?" Vincent said, and Elena knew this wasn't really a question. He was going to tell her anyway. "People like you don't pay attention to details. That's why you're serving tables instead of sitting at them." The table went silent. The woman in the silver dress looked down at her wine glass. One of the men cleared his throat uncomfortably, but no one said anything to defend Elena. No one told Vincent he was being cruel. Elena took the glass and walked back to the bar, her face burning. She counted to 10 in her head, the way her mother had taught her when she was little. "Don't let them see they got to you," her mother used to say. "Hold your head high." The rest of the meal was torture. Vincent found fault with everything. The bread was too warm. The salad had too much dressing. The steak was cooked medium rare like he asked, but he insisted he had said medium. Each complaint was delivered with the same casual cruelty, as if Elena was too stupid to understand basic instructions. "Do you even speak English?" he asked at one point, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Because I'm starting to wonder if there's a language barrier here." Elena's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice pleasant. "I speak English perfectly fine, sir. I'll have the kitchen remake your steak right away." "Of course you will," Vincent said, waving his hand dismissively. "That's what people in your position do. You fix your mistakes." By the time dessert came around, Elena just wanted the night to be over. Her feet ached from standing. Her face hurt from maintaining that fake smile. And somewhere deep in her chest, something hurt too, something that had nothing to do with physical pain. When Vincent's table finally finished, Elena brought the check. The total came to $543. Vincent pulled out a black credit card without even looking at the bill and handed it to her. "Must be nice," he said to his companions. "Living in a world where you don't have to worry about what anything costs. Not like some people who have to count every penny." Elena processed the payment and brought back the receipt for him to sign. This was the moment she always dreaded with customers like Vincent. The tip. She had long ago stopped expecting generosity from wealthy people. Some of the biggest tips she had ever received came from middle-class families who were clearly treating themselves to a special night out. They understood what it meant to work hard for money. Vincent signed the receipt with a flourish and stood up. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a single-dollar bill. He placed it on the table, then put his hand on top of it, looking directly at Elena. "Let me give you some advice," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "If you want to make something of yourself, you need to invest in education. Learn some skills. Better yourself. Because serving people like me, that's not a career. That's what people do when they have no other options." He lifted his hand, leaving the single-dollar bill on the table. The entire section of the restaurant had gone quiet. Other diners were watching now, some with sympathy in their eyes, others simply embarrassed to be witnessing this moment. "Thank you for dining with us," Elena managed to say, though her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Have a wonderful evening." Vincent laughed, a short, sharp sound. "I always do," he said. Then he and his party walked toward the exit, their voices already rising in conversation about their next destination, some exclusive club that probably had a velvet rope and a waiting list. Elena stood there for a long moment staring at that single-dollar bill. Around her, the restaurant slowly came back to life. Conversations resumed. Forks clinked against plates. But she felt frozen, rooted to the spot. One of the other waitresses, Amy, touched her shoulder gently. "Don't let him get to you," she whispered. "He's like that with everyone." But that somehow made it worse. Vincent wasn't cruel to Elena because of something she had done wrong. He was cruel because he could be. Because he saw people like her as less than human. As props in his life story rather than people with their own dreams and struggles and worth. Elena picked up the dollar bill and put it in her apron pocket. She cleared the table mechanically, her hands moving through familiar motions while her mind was somewhere else entirely, somewhere in the past when she had been someone different. Someone who had dreams that extended beyond making it through another shift without crying. What Vincent didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Elena had a secret. And in just a few minutes, everything was about to change. Elena was still clearing Vincent's table when she heard the sound system crackle to life. She looked up to see Mr. Romano, the restaurant owner, walking toward the small stage area near the grand piano that sat in the corner of the dining room. The piano was beautiful. A glossy black Steinway that caught the light from the chandeliers above. Most nights it sat silent, more decoration than instrument. Mr. Romano was a kind man in his 60s with silver hair and eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He had hired Elena 3 years ago when she desperately needed work, asking no questions about why someone with her background was applying for a waitressing job. He had simply given her a chance, and for that, Elena would always be grateful. He tapped the microphone twice and the gentle chime echoed through the restaurant. Conversations began to quiet as diners turned their attention to him. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Romano said, his Italian accent still strong despite 40 years in America. "I hope everyone is enjoying their dinner tonight. I have a small announcement to make." Elena continued clearing plates, trying to stay invisible. She could see Vincent and his group near the exit, putting on their coats. They had paused to listen, probably just out of politeness before they left. "As many of you know," Mr. Romano continued, "we typically feature live piano music during our dessert service on Tuesday evenings. Unfortunately, our scheduled pianist called in sick about an hour ago. A family emergency, very sudden." A few disappointed murmurs rippled through the crowd. The live music was one of the things that made the Sterling Room special. One of the reasons people were willing to pay premium prices for their meals. Vincent's voice cut through the room, loud and irritated. "Well, that's just perfect. First incompetent service, now no entertainment. Standards really have gone downhill everywhere." Several people turned to look at him. Mr. Romano's expression didn't change, but Elena saw his jaw tighten slightly. "However," Mr. Romano said, his voice growing warmer, "I am pleased to tell you that we will still have music tonight. We have someone very special who has agreed to perform for us." Elena felt her heart start to pound. She knew that tone in Mr. Romano's voice. She had heard it before, usually right before he did something that caught everyone off guard. "Please don't," she whispered to herself, even though she knew he couldn't hear her. But Mr. Romano was already looking in her direction, his eyes twinkling with something that looked like mischief mixed with pride. He extended his hand toward her. "Ladies and gentlemen, performing for us tonight will be Elena Martinez." The restaurant fell completely silent. Elena stood frozen, holding a stack of dirty plates, her face flushing red. Every eye in the room turned to look at her. She could feel their confusion, their curiosity, and from Vincent's direction something that sounded like a snort of disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me," Vincent said, his voice carrying clearly across the quiet room. He had stopped putting on his coat and was staring at the scene with an expression of pure disbelief. "The waitress? Is this some kind of joke?" Mr. Romano smiled calmly. "No joke, Mr. Blackwell. Elena has graciously agreed to perform for us tonight." Elena wanted to disappear. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. 3 years she had kept her past hidden, kept that part of herself locked away. And now Mr. Romano was dragging it out into the open in front of all these people, in front of Vincent. But she also saw the look in Mr. Romano's eyes. He wasn't doing this to embarrass her. He was doing this because he believed in her. Because he knew what she was capable of, even if she had spent 3 years trying to forget. She set down the plates on a nearby service station and wiped her hands on her apron. Her fingers were trembling. "This I have to see," Vincent said, turning to his companions with a grin. "This is going to be entertaining in a completely different way than planned." His friends laughed uncomfortably. The woman in the silver dress touched his arm as if to quiet him, but he shrugged her off. "What?" he said. "Come on, this is ridiculous. She probably learned to play Mary Had a Little Lamb on YouTube or something." Romano's lost his mind. Elena heard every word. Each one felt like a small cut. But something else was happening too. Something was waking up inside her. Something she had tried to bury for 3 long years. It wasn't anger exactly, though there was anger there. It was something fiercer, something that had to do with dignity and worth and remembering who she used to be. She untied her apron and folded it carefully, setting it on the service station. The other waitstaff had stopped what they were doing to watch. Amy gave her an encouraging nod. Carlos, one of the line cooks, had come out of the kitchen and was leaning against the door frame, his arms crossed and a slight smile on his face. They knew. They had always known, because Mr. Romano had told them when he hired her, but they had respected her privacy, never asking questions, never pushing her to talk about the past she so clearly wanted to leave behind. Elena walked toward the piano. The dining room wasn't large, but right now it felt like miles. Her sensible work shoes made soft sounds on the hardwood floor. She could feel everyone watching her, hear the whispers starting up. "I heard she used to play," someone murmured. "Romano wouldn't put her up there if she couldn't play at all," another voice said. Vincent's voice rose above the others. "This is the most absurd thing I've ever seen in an establishment like this. What's next, having the busboy do magic tricks?" His table erupted in laughter, though it sounded forced. Even his friends seemed uncomfortable now, as if they were beginning to realize they were watching something more than just entertainment. They were watching a man publicly mock someone who was about to put herself in an incredibly vulnerable position. Elena reached the piano and stood beside it for a moment. She ran her hand along its smooth surface. It had been 4 months since she had touched a piano. There was one in the basement of her apartment building, old and out of tune. And sometimes late at night when everyone was asleep, she would sneak down there and play quietly. But it wasn't the same. That piano had broken keys and sticky pedals. This one was perfect. She sat down on the bench and adjusted it slightly, her muscle memory kicking in. The bench needed to be at exactly the right height, the right distance from the keys. Her feet found the pedals automatically. Her hands hovered over the keys but didn't touch them yet. "Any day now," Vincent called out. "We don't have all night." More uncomfortable laughter. But Elena barely heard it. She was somewhere else now, somewhere in her memory. She was 16 years old, sitting in a practice room at the conservatory, her teacher standing behind her. "Before you play," her teacher had said, "you must become the music. Let everything else fall away. The audience, your nerves, your doubts. Let there be only you and the piano and the story you want to tell. Elena closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She thought about the last 3 years. The double shifts and the aching feet. The fake smiles and the casual cruelty from people who saw her as nothing more than a servant. The dreams she had put away in a box and tried to forget. And tonight, that $1 bill sitting in her apron pocket like an insult. She opened her eyes. Her hands came down on the keys, and the first notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 filled the restaurant like a wave of sound. The opening was dramatic, powerful, impossible to ignore. Her fingers moved across the keys with a precision that came from thousands of hours of practice, from a talent that had once been called extraordinary. The restaurant fell into a stunned silence. Vincent's smug smile began to fade, and Elena played on. The first few seconds were the hardest. Elena's fingers found the keys, and the opening chords of Rachmaninoff's concerto rang out through the restaurant. For a moment, she worried her hands would shake, that 3 years away from serious playing would show that she would embarrass herself in front of everyone. But then something magical happened. Her body remembered. Her fingers knew exactly where to go, exactly how much pressure to apply, exactly when to pull back and when to push forward. It was like greeting an old friend after a long absence and discovering that nothing had really changed between you. The music started soft and melancholy, like someone telling a sad story. Elena let herself sink into it, let the notes speak for her in ways that words never could. This piece had always been special to her. She had first heard it when she was 12 years old, sitting in her mother's car on the way to her first piano lesson. It had been playing on the classical radio station, and she remembered pressing her face against the window, tears streaming down her cheeks, though she couldn't explain why the music made her feel so much. In the restaurant, forks stopped halfway to mouths. A woman who had been reaching for her wine glass froze, her hand suspended in the air. The businessman who had been checking his phone slowly lowered it to the table, his eyes fixed on Elena. Vincent stood near the exit, his coat half on, his expression caught somewhere between confusion and disbelief. The smile had vanished from his face. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. Elena moved into the next section, and the music began to build. Her left hand played the deep, rumbling bass notes while her right hand danced across the higher keys. The melody was starting to emerge, hopeful and beautiful, like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. Her whole body moved with the music now, swaying slightly, her face showing every emotion the piece demanded. She had performed this concerto once before at her final recital at the Manhattan Conservatory of Music. She had been 25 years old, and everyone said she had a brilliant future ahead of her. The critics who attended had written glowing reviews. One had called her a once-in-a-generation talent. Another had said she played with a maturity and emotional depth far beyond her years. That had been 6 months before her father's heart attack. 6 months before she learned that he had been secretly drowning in medical debt from her mother's cancer treatments 2 years earlier. 6 months before she had to make the choice between her dreams and her family's survival. The music grew more intense. Elena's fingers flew across the keys in a passage that required absolute precision. One wrong note, one moment of hesitation, and the whole thing would fall apart. But her hands knew what to do. They had played these notes hundreds, maybe thousands of times. In practice rooms and concert halls, in competitions and recitals, and alone in her tiny apartment when the weight of her choices felt too heavy to bear. A tear rolled down the cheek of an elderly woman sitting near the piano. She reached out and squeezed her husband's hand. He squeezed back, his own eyes glistening. Vincent finally finished putting on his coat, but he didn't move toward the door. His friends had stopped talking entirely. The woman in the silver dress had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide. One of the men had pulled out his phone, not to check messages, but to record what was happening. The music shifted again, becoming more triumphant now. This was Elena's favorite part, where the melody soared and everything felt possible. She leaned into it, putting every ounce of herself into each note. She thought about the early mornings when she would practice before school, so in love with music that nothing else mattered. She thought about her first competition win, how her mother had cried and her father had lifted her up and spun her around despite his bad back. She thought about the night she had packed away her sheet music and performance dresses, telling herself it was just temporary, just until she got back on her feet, just until the bills were paid. That had been 3 years ago, and the box still sat in her closet, unopened. But here, now at this piano, she wasn't a waitress. She wasn't someone who got mocked and dismissed and treated like she didn't matter. She was a musician. She was an artist. She was someone who could take dots on a page and turn them into something that made strangers cry. The restaurant had gone completely silent except for the piano. Even the kitchen staff had stopped working to listen. Through the service window, Elena could see Carlos standing with a plate in his hands, forgotten, his eyes closed as he listened. Amy was crying openly now, though she was smiling at the same time. Mr. Romano stood near the bar with his arms crossed, nodding slightly to the music. He had heard Elena play before, once, late one night after the restaurant closed. She had been cleaning tables when she noticed him struggling to understand something about the piano, which had been acting up. She had offered to take a look, and before she knew it, her hands were on the keys. She had played for only a minute before stopping abruptly, embarrassed. But Mr. Romano had seen enough. "You have a gift," he had told her that night. "Hiding it doesn't make it go away. It just makes the world a little darker." Now, as Elena moved into the final section of the piece, she understood what he meant. This music wasn't just for her. It was for everyone in this room. It was for the elderly couple holding hands, for the businesswoman who had been crying into her phone about a bad day before Elena started playing, for the young couple on their first date who would remember this moment for the rest of their lives. The music built to its climax. Elena's whole body was engaged now, her arms sweeping across the full range of the keyboard, her foot working the pedals to create exactly the right resonance. The chandelier above seemed to sparkle in time with the notes. The city lights through the windows seemed to pulse with the rhythm. Vincent took a step closer to the piano. Then another. His face had gone pale. He looked like someone who had just realized he had made a terrible mistake, but didn't yet understand the full scope of it. The final notes approached. Elena had always loved this ending, the way it resolved all the tension and sadness into something beautiful and whole. Her hands shaped the last phrases with tender care, each note perfectly placed, perfectly timed. She played the final chord and held it, her foot on the sustain pedal, letting the sound ring out and slowly fade into silence. Her hands remained on the keys for a moment, her head bowed, her chest rising and falling with deep breaths. For 3 full seconds, the restaurant remained absolutely silent. Then someone started clapping. It was the elderly man whose wife had been crying. He stood up slowly, his applause steady and strong. His wife joined him, then the people at the next table, then the next. Within seconds, the entire restaurant was on its feet, applauding, but this wasn't polite applause. This wasn't the kind of clapping people do at the end of a show because it's expected. This was real. People were cheering, some of them shouting. The woman in the silver dress was clapping so hard her hands must have hurt. Several people had tears streaming down their faces. Elena stood up and turned to face the audience, her legs shaking. She bowed, the way she had been taught years ago in performance class. Head down, back straight, hold for 3 seconds, then rise. The applause got louder. Mr. Romano was walking toward the piano with his phone in his hand and the biggest smile Elena had ever seen on his face. Behind him, still standing near the exit with his mouth slightly open, Vincent looked like someone had just turned his entire world upside down, and in that moment, everything was about to change. The applause seemed to go on forever. Elena stood beside the piano, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She had forgotten what this felt like, this connection with an audience, this moment when music bridged the gap between strangers and made them all feel the same thing at the same time. Mr. Romano reached her first. His eyes were shining with emotion, and when he hugged her, she could feel him shaking slightly. "Brava," he whispered in her ear. "Your mother would be so proud." Elena's eyes filled with tears at the mention of her mother. Mr. Romano was the only person at the restaurant who knew the full story, who understood why a conservatory graduate with a promising career had shown up at his door 3 years ago asking for any job he had available. He pulled back and held up his phone, still recording. "I sent this to someone while you were playing," he said quietly so only she could hear. "An old friend of mine, Antonio Chen. He's the artistic director at the Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra." Elena's breath caught. The Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra was one of the most prestigious in the country. She had dreamed of performing with them once, back when dreams still seemed possible. "Mr. Romano, you didn't have to," she started to say, but he held up his hand. "Antonio has been looking for a featured pianist for their spring season. Their regular soloist broke her wrist last month, and they've been auditioning replacements with no luck." He glanced at his phone and his smile grew wider. "He just texted me back. He wants to meet with you tomorrow morning." Elena couldn't speak. She just stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. Around them, people were still clapping, still standing, though some had begun to sit down and resume their conversations in excited, hushed tones. "But I haven't played seriously in 3 years," Elena finally managed to say. "I'm out of practice. I don't even have—" "You just played one of the most difficult pieces in the classical repertoire flawlessly," Mr. Romano said gently. "In a room full of people, with no preparation after working a full shift. If you can do that, you can do anything." The elderly woman who had been crying approached them, still dabbing at her eyes with her napkin. "That was extraordinary, dear," she said to Elena. "Simply extraordinary. I've been coming to this restaurant for 15 years, and I've never heard anything like that." Her husband nodded. "We saw Evgeny Kissin perform that same piece at Carnegie Hall in 2019, he said. "You were every bit as good. Better even, because you made it sound like it came from somewhere real." More people were approaching now, wanting to congratulate her, to shake her hand, to tell her how the music had made them feel. Elena accepted their kind words with grace, though part of her still felt like she was dreaming. Like she would wake up any moment and find herself back in her apartment, the alarm clock blaring, another double shift ahead of her. Through the crowd, she saw Vincent. He hadn't moved from his spot near the exit. His friends were talking animatedly, clearly impressed by what they had just witnessed. But Vincent himself was silent. He was staring at Elena with an expression she couldn't quite read. Shock, maybe. Or something deeper. One of his companions, a younger man in an expensive suit, had his phone out and was scrolling through something. Suddenly his eyes went wide. "Vincent," he said, tugging on his friend's sleeve. "Vincent, look at this." He held out his phone and Vincent took it, his brow furrowed. Elena watched as his eyes scanned whatever was on the screen. His face went from pale to almost gray. The young man's voice carried across the restaurant, excited and surprised. "It's her, the Elena Martinez. She was a child prodigy, performed at Carnegie Hall when she was 17, won the International Tchaikovsky competition for young musicians. There are articles about her from 5-6 years ago. They called her one of the most promising pianists of her generation." The restaurant went quiet again. Everyone turned to look at Elena, then at Vincent, then back at Elena. Amy, standing near the kitchen, looked proud enough to burst. Carlos was grinning and shaking his head in amazement. Vincent was still staring at the phone. He scrolled down, reading more. Elena knew what he was seeing. There would be photos of her from competitions, younger and full of hope, articles about her performances. And then around 3 years ago, the articles would stop. There would be nothing about where she went or why she disappeared from the classical music world. "There's a video here," the young man said, taking his phone back. "From her Carnegie Hall debut, she was just a kid." He turned up the volume and suddenly the sound of a much younger Elena filled the restaurant. She was playing Chopin, her fingers dancing across the keys with youthful energy and passion. The recording quality wasn't great, clearly filmed by someone in the audience, but the talent was undeniable. Elena felt exposed, vulnerable. This wasn't how she wanted people to know her story. She had spent 3 years trying to leave that life behind, trying to convince herself that it was okay to be ordinary, that not everyone's dreams came true, and that was just how life worked sometimes. Vincent slowly walked toward her. His friends followed a few steps behind, uncertain. The whole restaurant watched this moment unfold, sensing that something important was happening. When he reached her, Vincent stopped. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "I don't understand," he finally said. His voice was quieter than Elena had ever heard it. "If you can play like that, why are you working here as a waitress?" It was the first time all evening that he had spoken to her like she was a real person. Like he was genuinely trying to understand something instead of just making assumptions. Elena took a breath. She could feel everyone listening, but somehow that made it easier. If she was going to tell this story, if her past was going to come out anyway, maybe it was better to own it. 3 years ago, my father had a massive heart attack, she said quietly. He survived, but the medical bills were crushing. I didn't know until after he got sick, but my parents had gone into serious debt years earlier paying for my mother's cancer treatment. She passed away when I was 23. The restaurant was so quiet you could hear the traffic from the street below. My father had taken out a second mortgage on our house to pay for my education at the conservatory. He never told me. He just wanted me to focus on my music, to not worry about money, but after his heart attack, he couldn't work anymore. The bills kept coming. We were going to lose the house. Vincent's face had gone completely blank. He looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. So I left the conservatory in my final year, Elena continued. I took the first job I could find that would pay enough to cover the mortgage and the medical bills. Mr. Romano hired me even though I had no experience. I've been here ever since. She paused. My father lives in a good care facility now. The house is paid off, and I get to play piano in my building's basement sometimes late at night when no one can hear me. The woman in the silver dress had tears streaming down her face. Several other people were crying too. Even the businessman who had been on his phone earlier looked shaken. You gave up everything, Vincent said slowly as if he was still trying to process it. Your career, your future, all of it. I didn't give up everything, Elena said, and there was steel in her voice now. I chose my father. I chose family. I chose making sure the man who sacrificed everything for me didn't lose his home and his dignity. That wasn't giving up. That was choosing what mattered most. Vincent stood there, and for the first time since Elena had known him, he looked small. Not physically small, but diminished somehow. Like he was seeing himself clearly for the first time and didn't like what he saw. He reached into his wallet and pulled out several bills. Hundreds, by the look of them. He held them out to her with a shaking hand. Elena looked at the money, then at his face. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the $1 bill he had left her earlier. She held it up between them. You know what? She said softly. I think I'll keep this one instead. She tucked the dollar bill back into her pocket and walked past him, her head held high. Behind her, the restaurant erupted in applause once more. Elena didn't sleep much that night. She lay in her small apartment staring at the ceiling, replaying everything that had happened. The performance, the applause, Vincent's face when he realized who she was. But most of all, she kept thinking about Mr. Romano's words. Antonio Chen, the Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra. A meeting tomorrow morning. At 3 a.m, she finally gave up on sleep. She went down to the basement where the old piano sat in the corner, covered with a sheet to protect it from dust. She pulled the sheet off and sat down at the bench. The piano was terribly out of tune and 2 of the keys stuck, but she played anyway. Softly, so she wouldn't wake the neighbors, she played until the sun came up. The Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra's offices were in a beautiful old building in Midtown. Elena arrived 15 minutes early, wearing the only professional outfit she owned, a black dress she had bought for auditions years ago. It still fit, though it felt strange after 3 years of wearing nothing but her waitress uniform. Antonio Chen was a small man in his 50s with kind eyes and an energetic way of moving. He greeted Elena warmly and led her to a rehearsal room where a grand piano sat waiting. Mr. Romano sent me the video of your performance last night, Antonio said, pulling up a chair. I've watched it 4 times already. That Rachmaninoff was exceptional. Thank you, Elena said, her voice quiet. Though I have to be honest with you, I haven't played professionally in 3 years. I'm rusty. There are probably dozens of pianists more qualified than me. Antonio smiled. Do you know what I look for in a soloist? He asked. Technical skill, yes. That's important. But what I really look for is someone who understands what the music is trying to say. Someone who can make an audience feel something real. He gestured to the piano. Last night you made a restaurant full of strangers cry. That's not something you can teach. That's not something that goes away just because you haven't been on a stage for a while. He handed her some sheet music. This is what we're performing in April. Beethoven's Piano Concerto No. 5, the Emperor Concerto. I'd like to hear you play the opening movement. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she took the music. The Emperor Concerto was one of the most demanding pieces in the piano repertoire. Bold, triumphant, requiring both technical mastery and emotional depth. She sat at the piano and began to play. 20 minutes later, when she finished, Antonio was standing with his arms crossed and tears in his eyes. When can you start rehearsals? He asked. The next 3 months were a blur. Elena rehearsed with the orchestra twice a week while still working at the Sterling Room. Mr. Romano had insisted she keep her job, but he cut her shifts in half so she would have time to practice. The other waitstaff picked up the slack without complaint. Amy even started a good luck fund, collecting tips to help Elena afford new performance attire. Elena's father came to every rehearsal his health allowed. Watching him sit in the concert hall, his eyes shining with pride, made every sacrifice worth it. He had cried when she told him about the opportunity, apologizing over and over for being the reason she had to give up her dreams. She had held his hand and told him firmly that he had nothing to apologize for, that she would make the same choice 1,000 times over. Vincent never came back to the Sterling Room. Elena heard through Amy, who heard from another customer, that he had left the city, gone to California or somewhere, trying to figure out some things about himself. The woman in the silver dress came in once, though, about a month after that night. She asked to speak to Elena. I just wanted you to know, the woman said, that what happened that night changed something in Vincent. I don't know if it will last. People like him don't usually change. But he's been different, quieter. He's been volunteering at a youth center in the Bronx, teaching business skills to kids from low-income families. She paused. He talks about you sometimes. About what you said. About choosing what matters most. Elena didn't know what to say to that. She hoped it was true. She hoped that one moment of understanding could plant a seed in someone, could make them see the world differently. But she also knew that Vincent's journey was his own. She had her own path to walk. The night of the performance arrived faster than Elena expected. She stood backstage at Lincoln Center, wearing a midnight blue gown that Amy had helped her pick out. Her hands were sweating. Her heart was racing. Through the curtain, she could hear the orchestra tuning up and the murmur of the audience taking their seats. You ready? Antonio asked, appearing at her elbow. Elena took a deep breath. I think so. It's been a long time since I've been this nervous. Good, Antonio said with a smile. If you're not nervous, you don't care enough. The nerves mean it matters to you. The stage manager gave the signal. It was time. Elena walked onto the stage and the applause washed over her like a wave. The concert hall was packed, every seat filled. She could see her father in the third row, sitting with the staff from the Sterling Room. Mr. Romano, Amy, Carlos, and at least a dozen others had all come to support her. She sat at the piano and placed her hands on the keys. The conductor raised his baton. The orchestra lifted their instruments and then silence. In that moment before the music began, Elena thought about everything that had led her here. Her mother's illness and her father's sacrifice. The years of struggle and the dreams she had packed away. That night at the restaurant when everything changed. The choice she had made to put family first, and how that choice had somehow led her right back to this stage. She thought about Vincent too, and how easy it was to judge people without knowing their stories. How everyone she passed on the street, served at a restaurant, or sat next to on the subway had a whole world inside them that she couldn't see. The conductor's baton came. Down Elena's hands came down on the keys, the opening. Chords of the Emperor Concerto filled the hall. Powerful and bold, the orchestra swelled behind her, strings and brass and timpani all combining to create something magnificent. Elena poured everything she had into the performance. Every moment of joy and sorrow, Every sacrifice and every small victory. The audience was completely silent, completely captivated. When the final movement ended, when the last triumphant chord rang out and faded to silence, the audience sat frozen for a heartbeat. Then they exploded into applause. People jumped to their feet, shouting and clapping. The standing ovation went on for nearly 5 minutes. Elena stood and bowed, tears streaming down her face. She looked at her father, who was crying too, his hands clasped together like he was praying. She looked at Mr. Romano, who was beaming with pride. She looked at all the people who had believed in her when she had stopped believing in herself. The next day, the reviews were extraordinary. The Times called her performance transcendent and a revelation. Online videos of the concert went viral, shared by classical music fans around the world. Elena's phone wouldn't stop ringing with offers. Other orchestras wanted to book her. Recording companies wanted to sign her. Music festivals wanted her to perform. But the moment that mattered most came 3 days after the concert. Elena was at her father's care facility, telling him about all the opportunities that were suddenly appearing when a package arrived. Inside was a letter and a check for $50,000. The letter was from Vincent. "Dear Elena," it read, "I've spent the last 3 months thinking about what you said, about choosing what matters most. I realized I've spent my whole life chasing money and status without ever stopping to think about what any of it means. You gave up your dreams to take care of your father, and somehow, by doing that, you found your way back to them. I gave up nothing and gained nothing that actually matters. This donation is for your foundation, if you decide to start one, or for whatever you think will do the most good. I'm not looking for forgiveness or even a response. I just wanted you to know that you changed my life that night. You taught me that every person has worth, has a story, has dreams that matter just as much as mine do. I'm trying to be better. It's hard, but I'm trying. Thank you for showing me what it looks like to be truly strong." Elena read the letter twice, then showed it to her father. "What do you think?" she asked. Her father smiled. "I think people can surprise you, and I think you should use that money to help other young musicians who need it. Turn your pain into someone else's opportunity." 6 months later, Elena launched the Martinez Foundation for Young Musicians. It provided scholarships, instruments, and support to talented students from low-income families. The foundation's motto, printed on all their materials, came from something her mother used to say: "Your gifts are not just for you. They're for everyone whose life you touch." Elena continued to perform with orchestras around the world. She recorded albums and won awards. But she never forgot where she came from. She kept that $1 bill framed in her office. A reminder that the way you treat people says everything about who you are. And sometimes, late at night after a performance, she would think about that evening at the Sterling Room. About how one moment of cruelty had turned into an opportunity for grace. About how the lowest point in her life had become the doorway to something beautiful. She had learned that your circumstances don't define you. Your choices do. And she had chosen kindness, chosen family, chosen to let her gift shine even when the world